Okay. Basically, I think most people know who we are, but to those of you who don't, our background in forestry is Donna's attended Selkirk College, and I'm not actually a forester, but a soil scientist and geologist, but been working mainly with forestry. We both worked for the Forest Service for a number of years here in Nelson, and then a bit on our own, and then we were off to Mozambique doing forestry work for 2 years. And subsequent to that, we spent about 6 months visiting forestry projects in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, which basically has led us to the point we're at now. In addition, we've been active in various watershed committees and community forestry type of situations here in the West Kootenays as well. And I've done some work with Indians in the north. With regard to this workshop in particular today, our objective is to try and look at development in the third world and also look at that in terms of forestry development. We're going to use a slideshow that we put together based on our travels to raise some of the issues and some of the points. And then we would like to follow that up. And, well, after looking at the slideshow, we'll have a bit of a discussion. Then we'll do a role play to try and elicit some feelings amongst ourselves as to what development means and how people react to it. And lastly, we'd like to tie it back together and look at some of the parallels or differences between forestry and development in the third world and forestry and development here in the Kootenays as well. I think maybe we should do that after the slide.
Oh, yeah.
No, yeah. Okay, we sort of think it might be useful for people to introduce themselves as well, and just maybe a brief word as to why you're here, what your interest is around the room. As John Graham said last night, it's best rather than starting at one end to start in the middle, so we'll start from here. Sorry about that. We'll start on the other side.
My name is Eva Walters, and I'm on the organizing committee for the Kootenay Centre Sustainable Future. I'm also very interested in forestry because we're just starting a watershed organization in our area, and my husband particularly is quite involved in negotiating the forestry about the different types of cutting, that sort of thing. And I'm also interested in third world development and how it can be done creatively and better than it's more sensitively than it's happening now. And so that's what I'm
just to add to what Eva said, I guess I'm interested in the parallels between the types of resource extraction that take place in the interior of British Columbia and in the third world. So I hope that we would perhaps underline those similarities. I'm Eva Walters. I thought she was going to say that.
I'm Della McCloud, and I'm interested in third world development, not specifically forestry, but
my name is Karen Lincoln. Last year I worked on a fire for a couple of weeks and kind of got more my interest into forest service, what kind of practices to do. And since forestry is a resource industry in BC, I'm interested in that too. Management practices to do.
I'm Helen Stevenson, and I live up in the Lardeau, and I would echo what Eva said for me, except that I'm looking at it from the perspective of living in the Lardeau and also very interested in what's happening in the other countries.
I'm Derek Lynch from Kaslo, I guess. I'm an agriculture student in Montreal, and I've long been interested in development.
I'm Premika Ratnam, and I'm a filmmaker, and I'm very interested in forestry and the third world.
I'm Tom McKenzie from Nelson. I spent all my life working in the forest industry, and I have a son who is studying forestry at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And we have had numerous discussions in regard to third world development, as it says here, third world development options, and forestry in developing nations. And so for that reason, quite interested in what you do.
Lynn Morris, and I'm interested in forestry practices in the West Kootenay in particular, and also how that relates to the West.
My name is Franz Brown. I'm the chairman of the watershed committee from the watershed of South Locan to and including the Sprout Creek. I am very interested in new initiatives and methods of forestry. Particularly, I'd like to hear about what's happening in the underdeveloped countries. I just made a trip through 4 East European countries, and I was amazed what they did there, how clean the logging practices were. And it is a far cry for what is happening here.
Russ McArthur. As a citizen of a country which is rapidly assuming third world status, I'm interested in hearing from places like Mozambique where we're going, and of course I'm also interested in watersheds and things like that.
I'm Tom Jamieson from Nelson, and I'm an independent ecological activist, and my writings have focused increasingly lately on the forests as a symbol of the types of unnecessary abuse that the human species is doing to the biospheric capability to support any life. The essence of my arguments have been that human needs can be met without clear-cutting in particular. We don't need newspapers and paper bags and pulp literature and junk mail, and with curtailing of the human population, we don't need to be building more houses with wood, etc., etc. But trees and other plant forms are absolutely essential to maintain our atmospheric equilibrium with the greenhouse effect and the deterioration of the ozone layer. We are facing an extreme crisis.
Well, hopefully we'll one new person.
And Norman, don't forget.
Right. We're just introducing ourselves, so just caught the end of it. If you could just say who you are and...
I'm Susan Slack, and this is one of the workshops that caught my interest and just came to find out more.
Yeah, Norman Fire, my name. I live just outside Nelson. Trying to find out what's going on in the world.
Okay.
Can I make one
Sure.
short announcement? We have sandwiches available at lunchtime, and around 10 o'clock or so, we'll pass around a sandwich sign-up sheet. They're $1.25. Just if you'd like a sandwich, just sign in.
What we're going to do first is look at the slide tape show. It's about 35 minutes. And it starts out mainly with some background about tropical forests, what they are, what's happening to them. And then the second part deals mainly with development and discusses various types of development and various options. Happy to answer any questions about the slideshow as well. Or what I would like to do is to steer the discussion into kind of what kind of issues were raised in there and what you see as solutions to those problems.
Could we talk a bit about some issues that weren't raised in the presentation?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. One being that you seem to assume that forests are infinitely renewable, and I would like to argue that they are not, that every tree removed from a forest is that much less nutrient in that ecosystem, and there is a critical point beyond which removal of such nutrients will doom the ecosystem, as, for example, has happened with the fabled cedars of Lebanon mentioned in the Old Testament. And this is especially a crucial problem in the tropical rainforests, where according to National Geographic, 97% of the nutrients are in the vegetation rather than in the soil system because of the rapid rate of decomposition. And that leads into the other issue, which I noticed by its exclusion, which was that you ignored the option of leaving the forests well alone and adjusting the human societal behavior around the ecological necessity of letting nature take care of its own systems. You're assuming that development of the forests is necessary and desirable. You're just sort of suggesting alternative means of development, and I'd like to question that basic assumption.
Okay, it's a big topic, and I'm sure we could talk all day about that very easily. I guess if I can just respond very briefly, and I wouldn't mind discussing that more with you, but I guess the first thing in terms of I don't disagree with anything you're saying, okay, first of all, okay. I don't think that it was intended to say that exclusion of development is necessarily not an option. That was not intended. I would say that one thing that has to be kept in mind is, I guess, I'm not sure that we agree on what we would consider the same definition of development and what we would, by definition, say exclusion or letting nature take care of itself. Number one, my presumption is that the human species is a part of nature and therefore has a right to exist in the forest. And I think that what I would call traditional uses, particularly, say, the indigenous people that are living in forests, who have been living there for a million years in some cases, their natural systems were quite well adapted to survive in those forests. It's only when we bring modern industrial development in that those systems break down. And that's because we, coming from the temperate areas, are importing a technology which was not used in those tropical areas, and in fact it has upset a balance drastically. And I think it's a matter that, in terms of, okay, so that's one topic. Secondly, the question of reaching this point in which the forest cannot be renewed. I think there is a point at which that may happen, that you may not be able to renew it to the state at which it was previously. But I would also say that it's never too late to bring a forest back. It may not be the forest that was there before, but forests can be brought back as long as the climate hasn't changed. It depends on your time perspective. Forests can be renewed in Lebanon as they can be anyplace else if the climate is maintained. It may take 10,000 years, it may take 1,000,000, but they will come back. Soil is not a completely non-renewable resource depending on your time frame.
We are also, by destroying the forests on such a global scale, altering the climate through the greenhouse effect.
Another situation, and that's quite true. And I think that was pointed out in the slideshow when we stated that, we're looking at, 11 hectares a minute, and there's only 1 hectare being planted for every 10 that are destroyed. I agree wholeheartedly that it's going much too fast, and I would like to see industrial development stop today. But I think the other side of that, when you look at it from a third world point of view, it's very nice for us in Canada to say, well, we'll stop logging and we'll start making computer chips or we'll change our economy. Those people are living in the forest as 100% dependent on their environment. And in fact, their attachment and their understanding of the environment are much, much, much greater than ours will ever be, because in fact, everything depends on that environment. Their problem becomes that in order to survive today, they have to destroy their potential to survive in 10 years. And they have no other option. Because the fact is that if they don't cut firewood today, they starve tomorrow. Admittedly, there may not be land in 10 years, and they understand that fact, but they have no choice. Their situation is a matter of life and death today. I mean, it's, for me, like, I've always been very involved in environmental issues for some time. And it was a real eye-opener for me to be with a person who was dealing with starvation this year and to say to him, well, you really shouldn't be using pesticides because you're creating the risk of cancer in yourself and your children 10, 20 years down the road. When in fact, that whole question was irrelevant, because if he didn't use them this year, he didn't have anything to eat this winter. And It's quite a different situation than you're dealing with here. And I'm not saying that those kind of principles are not what we should be governed by and what we should be looking at, but you have to be able to put yourself in the perspective of that person who's going to die tomorrow.
Okay, but you're not, you're ignoring the possibility of changing the societal patterns so that it is not necessary for them to use.
You're not ignoring that.
And it's not a them and us situation. We're all humans in the biosphere facing the same crisis, and we have the technology so that they can meet their heating needs through solar conversion and electricity and other means without cutting down those trees.
That's fine. You provide them with that equipment and they'd be happy to use it. But the fact is that they're not going to not cut a tree today because you might provide them with that 20 years down the road. That as much as we are in the same spaceship Earth and we are facing the same catastrophe, for them the catastrophe is today, and for you it's sometime in the future. And that's a very different perspective.
Okay, but the point is that we, rather than focusing on their means of development, I think should be addressing the larger issue of our biospherical crisis and doing as orienting our priorities to protecting what's left of the environment, which includes helping these people to survive today so that they're not short-sightedly destroying what they need to survive down the road.
Admittedly, I mean, that's exactly what's needed to be done. But I think we have to somehow understand their perspective too, and we can't just say they're destroying because they have bad practices. They're just surviving. That's all.
Just, this is related to that. In the slideshow, you emphasized, I guess, what you call scale of development, appropriate scale of development, involving local expertise or knowledge insofar as you can, and not getting the project too big, too hierarchical, and too Western for it to be able to be sort of, accepted in the area. Do you think that is going to be a real practical option? In other words, given these problems, the fact that you have short-term starvation, you have long-term, from our point of view, ecological disaster. I mean, long-term is relative. We're talking about, decades maybe from our point of view, because we have plenty to eat, supposedly. Do you think that through a more sensitive understanding of appropriate strategies, appropriate scales of development, that you can try to bridge this gap? Or, I mean, do you think that you're going to fall short in that?
I don't know. Again, it's my personal opinion, but yes, I think that those are the only kind of projects that will work. I think the experience we've seen from large development projects that are basically brought in from the outside is that their success rate is far less than the small ones. The small ones, on an individual basis, make a very small impact, but they in fact work. The other ones, in the short term, may make a big impact, but they often fail in the long run because they don't fit the needs of the local people. And the local people, their needs have to be satisfied before they can partake in any kind of these things.
In terms of proportion to the destruction of the environment, I think those that are using it for their own consumption form a very small part of the total reduction of forests and things like that. I mean,
No, they don't.
You don't
In
think
fact,
so?
they occupy the largest single percentage. The use of
Well,
fuel
that's what
would...
that graph showed. The
Yeah.
graph showed that it's just the reverse of what the situation we have here. It's individual consumption that adds up to create the total
But you were saying that like the
impact.
slash and burn agriculture, if it's on a small enough scale, it's ecological, it'll sustain itself. But
It sustained itself for millions of years.
right. So it's that plus all the development that's going on that's causing the problems now, and it's causing the imminent starvation.
It's what's happened in the problems are different in different parts of the world. Okay, I think that's maybe one thing to clarify is that, for instance, we take the Amazon basin. The indigenous populations there are quite small, and they're quite capable of continuing with no problem whatsoever. What is harming the Amazon is industrial development from the outside, where the wood is being cut and being exported to the U.S., to Japan, and to Europe. And that's what's destroying the Amazon. It's also being destroyed. A lot of it is just being cut and burned, lying on the ground to provide grazing lands because Brazil exports beef to the U.S. It's not the indigenous people that are destroying it there. And in fact, if you look at a percentage basis, Brazil is a much better manager of the tropical forest than Southeast Asia, Central America, or other areas, even though it has a very bad reputation. It's just that it has a lot more to destroy in terms of percentages. It looks better. In Africa, the problem is quite different. Africa has a very small amount of rainforest. Most of the forest in Africa is savanna, or what we call this tropical deciduous forest. And there, industrial development is a very, very small percentage of the total. And most of the wood goes to fuel wood. Something in Africa, something like the energy supplies in Africa, something like 80% of the total energy supply is met by fuel wood, not by oil or electricity, because people cook and heat almost solely with fuel wood or with charcoal. And what's happening there is you're seeing a combination of factors. Number one is an increase in population, which is very rapid. You're seeing a problem with droughts over the past few years, and you're seeing problems by political problems, war, which all those things are combining together to create a demand on areas that was unknown previously. And often, even in Africa, the problem is very centralized. Like you'll have around Nairobi, around Maputo, around centers, the fuel wood shortage is incredibly bad, and basically the forests are disappearing. And you can go to remote parts of the country, or in fact there's no problem whatsoever. There's an excess of wood. But overall, on the average, the problem is extremely severe. And overcutting is going on at such a rate, particularly in the Sahel, where the forests are disappearing. Exactly as you're pointing out, that you're reaching a point where the forests can't naturally regenerate by themselves. And a lot of the programs that are going on in Kenya are in fact agroforestry programs looking at trying to reforest areas which can only be reforested with outside assistance.
How would you look for an appropriate way to use some of the small intensive logging programs which you've shown on this program here, and use them as an applicable way here for the forestry systems that we have here as an option? Because I feel personally that once we finish with our industrial forest methods here through the larger corporations such as Macdonald, Lardeau, Crown Silverback, and that's rapidly happening, depletion of our forests in North America and on the coast of BC, that inevitably what will happen is that they'll simply move their operations into the other parts of the world, back into the tropical areas of Africa and Brazil and other parts of the world, and just continue on in the same sort of process.
I don't think you even have to look in the future. That's already happening.
Well, that's happening, but what I'm saying is it'll be speeded up, it'll be accelerated, and all out of proportion. So, you know, there's that time reference we're going to deal with, but
I think, you know, my answer to changing forestry management in BC is to look at the same kind of thing. It won't be exactly the same scale. I think the technologies will be different, mainly because we are a society which has already fully adopted modern technology. And I think that certainly our economic systems in terms of wage scales and that will not justify some of the things that are justifiable there.
yeah.
But on the other hand, I think when you look at the organizational structures and who in fact is managing our forests, or who we're letting manage our forests, is the thing that's different. I think the thing in terms of scale and community involvement are exactly the same. And
That's right.
At
It's
the
not
end of this, I would
sustainable
like
as
to
it
deal
is now, yeah.
with that.
Power structure as it is. Yeah.
I think there's a book over there called Stumped by Ken Drusher. I don't know if you've read that, but it gives a very good summary of what's happened in terms of the concentration. And the Silicon Valley Resource Project manual talks about it specifically in the Silicon Valley as well, very clearly what's happened in the last 30 or 40 years in BC. I think an interesting sidelight also that wasn't in the slideshow, which kind of ties this together, what's happening here and what's happening in the third world. If you look at the United States consumption of tropical hardwoods, the United States actually produces, or has the capability to produce, more hardwoods than they consume. But because of the fact that Americans have become very environmentally conscious, they've in fact begun to protect those hardwoods. And so what's happened is the markets haven't disappeared. So what the U.S. has done is protected their own hardwood stands and created parks and reserves and very clear management priorities and gone to the third world and ripped off their hardwoods and consumed them in North America. And I think there needs to be, within the environmental movement and within sort of forest management circles, we have to begin to look at a global picture, because it's the consumption end that's driving what's happening in the third world in many cases.
That will happen here as well in DC as we get more restrictive about cutting practices, because if it's Pinus radiata or eucalyptus or whatever for pulp in the tropical regions, if the multinationals can't cut it and get it cheap out of British Columbia, they're going to get it. They're going to get it elsewhere. So we're going to export another problem, I suppose.
It's possible.
Yes, you bring up the matter of how long forests can keep regenerating themselves. Would you say that in the final analysis that would depend on the rate at which the mineral soil can be converted into organic matter?
Well, the mineral soil isn't converted into organic matter, but the plants generate the organic matter, and any given ecosystem has a level at which it's producing the organic matter, and it also has a reserve of mineral nutrients. And you can't take out more than is coming in, as basically you were pointing out. And there's a point at which you take out more than is able to come in under natural conditions. Unless you have some other way to replace that, site productivity will decrease. And in fact, it's happening in some sites in British Columbia today because of the management practices we're using. There's no question about it. And as Tom pointed out, in the tropical areas, in some cases, the quantity is much less as to what's actually stored in the soil. The percentage that's in the plants is much greater, and therefore the danger is much higher. But that's not to say that there isn't a system under which it can be sustained. I think if you look at slash and burn agriculture as it was traditionally done, you're looking at probably 5% of the whole area being denuded at any given time. It was done in small blocks, some of them no larger than this room or 2 or 3 times this room. They were abandoned and people moved on, not to the next adjacent block, but they moved maybe 10 kilometers away for a similar type, in which case that small area had 100, 200, maybe 500 years to regenerate and recoup, and fine, no problem whatsoever. But if you shorten that and say instead of coming back in 500 years, you come back in 20 years, then you're looking at a completely different situation. Or in fact, if the blocks are 10 times larger and the rate of spread back in becomes infinitesimally small, then again, a completely different situation.
Yeah, but the point is the ash that you get from the burning is less than the matter that was there before, isn't it? And so in order to get back the previous condition, you have to take something from the basic soil, the mineral soil. And how does that occur with the mineral soil can be converted into...
Mineral soil is converted. There's extra nutrients come out of the air, actually. Nitrogen comes out of the air and combined with oxygen and carbon and the rest of it.
Essentially, when you get down to the basics, that's really what the controlling factor is when you look at it very long term.
Sorry, go ahead. You were first.
I was going to say the title, Third World Development Options, brings us right back to the same point as it always gets to. Foreign aid, technical assistance from the Western world, which ignores completely the cultural background of people who sustain their lives and their civilization or their society in the forested areas. And that as far as we're concerned in the Western world, and I blame the philosophy that has developed in the Western world completely for the increased rate of destruction of the rainforest areas in developing countries, in third world countries. And I think, again, that if there's anything that we get out of this at all, we get out of it an understanding of a need to convince the people in our country who are in positions of influence and power to adopt an entirely different approach to foreign aid, technical assistance, and the development of third world countries.
If I can just add one thing to that, I was in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago and was visiting forestry people in CETA. And it was very interesting to hear people there whom we often write off as the people who are perpetuating the bad end of it, saying exactly what you're saying. It was very heartening to hear that. They were just involved in setting up a community forestry project in India. And right now, forestry aid, which is given by Canada, 80% of it has to be Canada. It's tied, what they call tied aid, where the money has to be spent in Canada, either hiring Canadians or buying Canadian equipment. But the problem with the community forestry project is that the whole idea of setting up a community forestry project is that it doesn't have any requirements for foreign input. The idea is that it's completely self-sustaining. It's local labor with maybe a bit of technical assistance, and the idea is to reduce foreign inputs to the absolute minimum such that it's sustainable on itself, which means that basically CETA policies say that we cannot operate that kind of project. So people in CETA realizing that, in fact, the kind of things we're talking about today are what's needed for long-term development, what they did is they took all their projects in Southeast Asia and said, well, 80% of all these projects have to be tied aid. So most of the projects that CETA does are 100% tied aid. They're supplying Canadians as technicians, they're supplying Canadian equipment. So they took that 20% off all the other projects, lumped it together, and did this project, which was 80% Indian and 20% tied aid.
Where is it located?
It's in Pradesh, I can't remember the name.
Yeah. Himachal Pradesh?
No, the other one.
Uttar Pradesh? Pradesh is like province, so it could be any. Is it in the north? Or
It's in the northwest.
North?
Northwest, I believe, or Midwest. I
Um,
have to look it up. They
Okay.
pick the name out right away. But I think that people in CETA are lobbying very strongly to try and change that component. But I think that what you're saying is completely true, and that is where a lot of the problem lies. And as you noticed, when you look at Canada, something like 97% of Canadian forestry production is industrial, and 80% is community, or 85% is community in the third world. Well, right there you see the immediate problem of supplying our technology and our information systems to them. Completely inappropriate.
Why do you think that those lessons aren't being learned? Is it political reasons, political reluctance, or just not real?
I think they are being learned. I think things are changing. I might just say that this slideshow was given by, we did this slideshow for Kaslo, and they gave it to people in CETA. And they were also very happy with it. We actually got very good response from people in CETA. And I think that the general feeling and approach to forestry in the third world is changing, and I think we are learning, but it's been a very slow process. And it's not going to change overnight. Like right now, CETA has commitments to various projects. Some of them are running for 5 and 10 years, and they can't just cancel those projects. So it's going to be a slow evolution, but I think it's beginning.
My response to these sorts of considerations is that from the ecological perspective, differences in foreign policies are superficial to the point of being irrelevant. As long as we're continuing to operate within a capitalist, nationalist structure for meeting human needs, which emphasize a materialistic value system, which is to say that one's status and self-esteem should be measured by one's consumption patterns and one's possessions, that in conjunction with the exponentially exploding human population, we're going to continue to destroy the forests, however enlightened our foreign policies end up. It's the nature of the corporations to seek profits without, with minimal considerations of impact on social and environmental components. And if we are oriented towards looking at the forest's best interests and humans' best interests in terms of ecological preservation, since we are absolutely dependent on plant life to maintain us, then we have to change that basic value system.
I couldn't agree more, but I think one has to focus on all fronts simultaneously.
Foreign policy can either support that industrial capitalist thrust into the world, or it can support a different one, which is community-based and local needs, small scale.
No, what I'm saying is when you're talking in terms of foreign policy, you're still thinking in terms of a nationalist separation of human interaction. And I'm saying that that's artificial, and especially, for example, in Africa, as was pointed out by yourselves yesterday, how the boundaries have no real relevance to the political groupings.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that working through this kind of community-based development, like as for example, right now, CETA is developing an agroforestry research project in Southern Africa, and rather than looking at it as a country-specific project, it's being looked at in the context of SADC, and it's being done on a regional basis. And I think that's done on an ecological zone type of basis across the region, which makes a lot more sense. And I think there are moves to try and do that, and I think that it is, sure, that is necessary as well. In terms of time, I'd like to cut off the discussion now, if that's possible. And we'll take a break, have a coffee, and then we're going to try a role-playing thing afterwards.
Before the break, I think we had quite a good discussion and are beginning to understand some of the complexities and the issues around forestry and third world development. Now what we want to do to try and even deepen our understanding further is to put ourselves into sort of a simulated situation in an African country. The objective is to try and deepen our understanding and help us experience in a small way what people in developing countries, the conflicts that they're facing, and perhaps then we can discuss ways of trying to resolve some of those conflicts. What we're going to do is place ourselves in a country called Malawi, and what we're going to do is I have a scenario here that describes the situation in this particular area of Malawi and what is about to happen there. We have a panel here who will be speaking to you later. You are going to be the community, and what I would like you to do is, as I read through this scenario, is to think about a person from the community that you can sort of identify with. I want you to choose for yourselves a role that you can take on, and think about what your concerns are about the situation that is evolving. Think about what questions you have, what worries you have, or alternatively, what benefits you see are about to happen from the situation. Okay? So think about that as I read through the scenario, and try and choose for yourself a role that you can somehow identify with. Okay? Malawi is a moderate-sized African country. It's famed for its beautiful beaches, swaying palm trees, fascinating wildlife, exotic tribal customs. At least that's what the tourist brochures say, and as far as they go, the brochures don't lie. But this isn't the reality that most of the citizens know. For Malawi is one of the world's poorer countries. For most of its citizens, poverty, inadequate health care, low life expectancy, a lack of education, endless hours of work in subsistence agriculture, unemployment, and little hope of positive change are the reality. But the government of Malawi has plans to change all of that. The government has just signed a preliminary agreement with a large foreign-owned company, Downtree Incorporated, to develop some of the forest resources in the country. The area of particular interest is the Shimbuzi Valley. Shimbuzi itself is a small town where about 1,000 people live. The town provides services, stores and a market, a barber, a small school, to another 1,000 people who live throughout the valley in small family groups. These itinerant farmers practice slash and burn agriculture. This means that they live in the forest, clearing and burning small plots for growing food. And every few years they move to fresh land, when the fertility of their plots decreases. The farmers also hunt the wild game, which lives in the forest. Surplus agricultural products and meat are sold to the people in the town. The Shimbuzi Valley is remote, with only a dirt track leading to it from the more populated areas of Malawi. The people don't suffer greatly from drought, floods, or food shortages, but they're very poor and their lives are hard. The Shimbuzi Valley has significant undeveloped potential in its extensive forest of native hardwood trees. At present, only one small sawmill in Shimbuzi makes use of the wood, producing lumber for local consumption and employing 12 people. The government wants to allow construction of a sawmill in Shimbuzi by Downtree Inc. and give them long-term tenure over the land in the valley. The government's objectives are, 1, to increase foreign earnings by export of the valuable wood, thereby benefiting the national economy. 2, to provide employment and associated benefits to the people of Shimbuzi and area. In other words, create more money in the community. Build a larger school, a health post, a proper road, and better housing. The government has essentially given the okay to the company, but wants to gain the support of the local population. The slash and burn farmers are of particular concern because they will no longer be allowed to occupy the lands they have traditionally farmed. Downtree will have sole control over the forest and will limit access to it, mainly because of concern over wildfires, a common problem in slash and burn agriculture. Plans for relocation of these farmers have been talked about, but the company is unwilling to pay the cost of relocation. They see it as a responsibility of the government, who has goodwill, but financial and organizational problems. So today, the government has organized a meeting with the community, open to anyone who wishes to attend. At this meeting, a panel will speak, and then the community will have the opportunity to ask questions and give their opinions of the project. Okay, so that's the situation.
Before we start, I'd like to know one person who's going to be a slash and burn person.
Okay. What we'll do, give people a minute to think about what their role might be. So, I mean, it can be a business person in town, or a slash and burn at present farmer, or...
I suggest you just assign the roles, it'll make it easier to have contribution from all
Well,
aspects.
I would rather that you choose your own one that you can sort of identify
Everybody
with.
could decide to be mother.
I doubt it.
I think I'll just go out of this straight now, so.
Yeah, okay. So you're a silent member of the community.
If you're the people in town now, it's mainly just the merchants and the agricultural people.
Well,
Providing support to the local community. Are there any, what other services are there? Any schools there? Or
there's a small school, yeah.
Is there a hospital?
Any hospital?
No hospital?
No clinic?
No clinic? Not yet.
Electrical supplies?
No electricity? No.
But if the company comes in, they may get these things.
Well, that's a possibility.
Is the agricultural population spread throughout the whole valley?
Throughout the valley, they live in just in small family groups.
Is the local sawmill cooperative?
No, it's just private business. So that's another, I mean, it could be a worker at a sawmill, you could be the owner of that sawmill, another store owner. Okay, what I'd like you to do is put your role on a piece of paper so that we know who you are. Can it, So once you've chosen your role, think about what questions you want to ask this panel that the government has sent, and what your concerns are about this project. And once you've done that, then maybe you can have a conversation with the person next to you in your role, just as kind of a warm-up. Talk about these people who are coming today, and who are they, and what is it that they want anyway.
Well, people know me. I'm a...
The developing country has quite a few problems, serious problems. Two of those are a lack of jobs for skilled people and a shortage, an extreme shortage of foreign exchange to buy needed imports. Now, the government has been working very hard to solve this problem. We've made some significant gains, I think.
And
above our
Yes, we had some strange words coming to us.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And they held up there.
You'll be able to get a job, I'm sure.
I'd recommend
It's gonna happen anyway, whether village wants it or not.
That's right.
Well, I think we should make a motion that we set up a development committee. And we should like to thank our visitors for spurring us to take this action.
So, some feedback on that. How did that feel, taking on those roles and being in that situation?
One of the things I noticed, and that, you know, was the comments are sort of flying, is that in one sense we were taking on a role, but in another sense we were above the roles, you know, because we do have this outside knowledge that those people wouldn't necessarily have.
Right.
Also, from your experience, are meetings like this even held in the first place?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, they do that.
Most governments are
Token,
sensitive
same as our
to
government.
that.
Well,
It's just less sophisticated.
they're often held in this,
Governments that would be sort of left of center would tend to do that more than dictatorships.
but I think the important element of this one was, as we saw, was that the decision had already been taken.
Yeah. That's what,
And that's the important one, which is why I kind of raised that thing of visiting my cousin in Zimbabwe, where there are alternative ways of doing it. And that was something we were trying to make in the slideshow, is that it's important to involve people at the initiation stages, not at the approval stage. That's too late already.
That's what I felt in Soka. Everything is kind of already kind of lost, and it's just kind of arguing. And, oh well, you know, and everything is already decided, kind of thing. Yeah, just saying.
Less sophisticated, that's all.
right.
It's just very levels of sophistication.
If I could just say something about the feedback for the roles, I certainly agree the decision was already made. That's the basis of this exercise. But the three of us sort of sitting down to try to take the other side, if you want to call it that, really pointed out to me how poorly prepared we were, to do that. We just sort of tried to be sincere, tried to be narrow-minded, but that's not, I don't think, quite enough. I don't think that gets to the root of this, because I think that somebody who was going to try to propose a project like that would be more than sincere and more than narrow-minded. I mean, they believe that they know what is right. I mean, they're not just doing it because there's going to be money made. That's very important. Don't ever lose sight of that. But still, there's more than that. They usually think they have your best interest at heart.
I think it's a somewhat North American attitude that we have attained progress. And what we want to do to help the third world countries is go and show them what progress is and how wonderful it is. Where I myself lived in South America for 2 years. And when I went there, I felt like I was in a culture that had attained their own progress, in their everyday lives and their simplicity, and that we could pay attention to. However, the higher up you get in our bureaucracy or government or whatever, the less you see that.
Like, she was so keen to get medical attention, but they have a lot of theories that they really believe in, and in a lot of cases work, and they don't want that taken away from them.
Yeah, there is that aspect. And then what happens is the point that I made there was from an actual situation where a company comes in from the US, they set up, or from whatever developed country, they set up, they provide for their own, as if they were living in a desert and they had lawns, bungalows, air conditioning, all the things that nobody else there had. Okay, they set up for their own, they get it all set up so that people don't even have to communicate with the rest of the village or the town that's there. They also provide for the workers, on a lesser scale, for the workers of the country, and they leave the rest of the town alone. The rest of the town still has their old operations. And, it's just incredible to see.
And it also gets them upset, maybe something's wrong with their existence, by watching this special community you know, operating the way it is, they get anxious and stuff.
In your experience, would most villagers have been excited about a project like this, or would they be skeptical? Would they be different? I mean, do you know?
I would say they'd be.
I think it would be a mixed.
Yeah.
There would be probably more people than just one who were excited. But
Because a lot of them don't have much education,
Yeah,
they wouldn't have
right.
been able to think about
The implications.
Yeah, a lot of
And
implications.
they wouldn't think, well, if we have all these consumer goods, we still might not be happy, probably.
No.
But how does that differ from here? I mean, look,
Yeah,
what
right.
if, what if McCloud
Good
or
point.
somebody came into Nelson and, we've got our, our electric toothbrushes and so on and so
We're gonna
forth
build a
already.
pulp mill.
We've got hospitals and we have schools and all this, fine. But look at the similarities. We would sit around like this and we would have some of the same objections. We would say, what are you going to do in the long term? How can we sustain this? What are the ecological costs and so on and so forth? But our objections would not be much above the level of the objections that were raised here. And the people who were proposing the project would have similar closed minds, completed agendas and so on and so forth. And so what you can say is, I think that there's an incredible similarity between the two situations, even though one is, obviously a much more severe and extreme case than the other.
Yeah, I mean, what if somebody came in and said, a company came in and said they were going to produce 300 jobs in Nelson?
Well,
Would
I
be
think
falling all over
that was something that, I don't know if we can, I don't want to, that's something we wanted to steer the discussion into at this point, was to say, look, somebody else want to raise something before I do that? Is that, okay, I'll wait a second on that. Go ahead.
I just want to respond to the role-playing situation over here. I set myself up to be fairly, convinced to start with that this is really going to be a good thing. But as I heard as I was listening to my customers, I really got shaky about, I wanted the support. I wanted the assurance from my government man. I didn't care so much about the other man because he was just there. But the government, I really wanted assurance from him that, if we could have a cooperative, would the government work with it? I think that the role playing of a person who is a local person and yet has been psyched up to believe that this thing is good, and then if a lot of the people that their livelihood depends on are in opposition, it becomes, they're not so sure as they're assessing.
Just realizing then how much this kind of project is proposed to split the community before everybody was kind of happy with their kind of dealings and it was kind of negotiated one way or another, and then all of a sudden the community was split, and the company really easy could build on that and just increase the split and try to pick up the bigger half.
They will.
Yeah.
They will.
And just by the controversy of having that issue, they just work on the split.
The government will do that as well.
Yeah.
Especially the old folks, because there's jobs that certain ages can do when the company comes in that the old folks could help out before, and they were kind of barred from that, and so they had to just, so they would sit a lot of the time, that kind of thing.
What I would like to do, that raises a really good point. Another point that I want to get into is one thing which you raised, and I think is very important, is to look at the parallels between that situation in Rabawi or wherever, and the parallels in the West Kootenay, and I think there are a lot of parallels. Actually, for me, it was really interesting writing the slideshow, and when we were working on that, to realize as we were going through the literature and going through what was happening as to how much of that I could just as well take an example from the Slocan or take an example from here, because it really is similar. But I think that point, what you were just saying, points out that there are also differences, and significant differences. If we're going to appreciate development in the third world and compare it with Canada, some things aren't the same. And I think one of them is the cultural changes. Now, it's certainly similar in some parts of Canada where you're looking at native communities, but let's say for the West Arm, my example of the parallel I was going to suggest was, let's say KFB has been gone now for a number of years. Company came in, and this was the great hope of a lot of people here, was a company was going to come in and say, we're going to build a sawmill in Harrop to replace,
A pulp mill.
or a pulp mill in Harrop to replace KFP, and exactly the same, that's a pretty parallel scenario, but one thing that wouldn't be different is, as you were saying, their culture and social structure was going to be completely destroyed and reworked. And that isn't necessarily the case here. It isn't that drastic. Well, I'd like people to talk about that, not only what the parallels are, but what are the differences too, and I think those are important to understand as well. So if we can continue the discussion on that line.
I'd like to say, living in the Lardeau, when KFP and its evolved other companies that followed KFP, when they pulled out, it was just like one family after another moving. I mean, the community became really depleted. I mean, because so many people, I mean, not necessarily in Argentina, but in the valley total, it just wiped out most of the young families. And therefore the school changed. I mean, this was a real devastating kind of thing.
I think there was a similarity between us and you.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Exodus.
Well, as Howard Dirk says, there's a silver lining in every cloud. People moved out were all NDP supporters, so.
Sorry, I'm just going to provide you. Do you think that the difference lies between, and partly between our situation and the third world, is the fact that a lot of those people in the third world haven't sort of lived with a money economy? I mean, the whole concept of money and consumer goods is foreign to them.
Well, they know about it. It's foreign in their everyday life, but they're becoming more aware of it as.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
They would like. Yeah, I mean, especially say, it's hard to put a class distinction on it, but the people who have had the opportunity to work for these companies coming in, and you know, many of the teenagers that I met down there have written to me since and said, "Can you sponsor me? Can I come to Canada?" You know, that kind of thing. It's a real push.
As keen on money as all the rest of us after a generation.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I've been around, I think.
Okay, plus this basic notion of progress, I think, although it's contaminating more and more of the planet's population, is essentially a Judeo-Christian transmogrified concept through the development of capitalism, which is also another product of the Judeo-Christian approach to experience. And at the heart of the notion of progress is the concept that this situation is somehow inadequate, that there is a better status out there to be achieved somehow, and we can achieve it. Whereas I think in many of the pre-literate or quote-unquote more primitive societies, they approach the whole their life experience in an entirely different way, where they this is the way things are, this is the way things have always been, and this is the way things should be.
But things keep evolving so that nothing stays stable. So even there is a certain amount of change in even those societies that you're mentioning, like they're not just staying static. They see these little influences come in, so they're not just staying the way they were. I mean, I wouldn't think, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I think the important thing with regard to that is that I agree that, I mean, I think that one thing that progress or one big change that's happened is the fact that no one on this planet is isolated anymore, and it's impossible to be. So the important point for me is giving the power to communities such that they can decide their own destiny as to what change they want to happen and in what direction it's going to occur, rather than, in this case, the government and the outside coming in and saying, this is what's going to happen to you. But those people have to make up their own minds. If they want to stay the way they are, or only bring in certain things from the outside, that should be their decision, not someone else's decision.
I think basically that room to breathe that they felt they were losing, and that's basic with all of us, regardless.
I think now you're getting right close to what's really going on here. That's basically what I was going to say. But I think if everybody here were to put themselves in the position of the bureaucracy to try to imagine how it is that these people are going to come into an area and say, this is what we're going to do, this is what we society. That might help you to see, I guess, or it might give us an idea of what we could do about it, what the real problem is and what some of the real solutions might be, because in this particular area, we face basically it's ecological problems, and it is also in the third world, and especially the most impoverished areas. But as you were saying before, for them it's a matter of a year-to-year livelihood. They may they're not going to be concerned about long-term ecological problems if they face starvation in a year or less. You can't expect them to. It's become short-term for them. The overall long-term problem is the same worldwide. And one of the real causes of that long-term problem is that local people do not have any real input. They don't have any method or mechanism to have control over their region, their area, and through that sort of chain, hope to cover the whole globe. So we're disenfranchised, all of us. We're disenfranchised here. We're not worried about starving in a year, but we are looking at, global catastrophe. They're disenfranchised there. They're going to starve, and they're kind of almost out of the picture in many ways. They have so little power. On the other hand, the solution is very similar, I think. That's my opinion.
To me, the difference is that the solution there is easier to attain because the people are already in a cooperative community structure. We don't have that here. We're insular, we expect a certain standard of living, we depend on someone else to hand us a wage. We don't have a cooperative community structure in most cases where people go as a community and collect firewood for the whole community to have for the winter, or take in their old people for care. No, they're sent off to a nursing home. That's been broken down over decades, I think, in our society to the point where we're isolated individuals. And I think that building a community structure to transfer power to the local level is going to be far more difficult in a developed nation ever than in a underdeveloped nation, all poverty aside, because people are not used to a cooperative structure.
That may be true in some places, and others not so true. It's in Mozambique, where people traditionally lived in just very small family groups, and there was some sort of interdependence between them, but they're very, very much concerned with looking after their own family. And that it was difficult, in fact, to organize cooperatives because people didn't understand why they should work with these people, why they've been getting along fine just working in their own families. And so that sort of cooperative sense had to be built there as well.
Plus you have the people that have the power and the economic benefit to lose are not going to give it up willingly or without a fight.
I believe that most of us, when I say us, I'm speaking about our whole society, Western society, have some very hazy ideas about democracy and democratic participation by people in the society. And that we could look to some other societies to find developing countries, in some of the third world developing countries, we could find forms of democratic expression that were much closer to real democracy than that which we have here. Many people are brainwashed enough to believe that democracy and capitalism are synonymous, that you can't have one without the other. And others of us believe that, well, it's not a perfect system, but it's maybe the best system that exists in the world. And this is a clear indication that they've never studied the real principles of democracy. And that some of the third world countries, which have a form of democratic centralism, which requires the participation of everybody at the local level, are much more democratic than we are, where we go and cast a ballot once every 4 years, or 2 years, or 3 years, whatever the notion of the Prime Minister happens to be. We cast a ballot, we elect a government, and they dictate, that majority government dictates our whole social, cultural, and economic life until such time as we have an opportunity to go and cast another ballot. Now this is not democracy at all, completely alien to true democracy, where you have participation. I think democratic centralism has as much in it that we could look to, and which we could integrate into our democratic society and have this sort of participation which is essential to have an informed community to carry on.
Democracy is about 2% of the time, dictatorship the other 98%.
Right.
I have a question I'd like the two of you to speak to. Going back to the role-playing situation we had, I wonder how, I mean, we imagine what we can imagine, and this group is really imagining what it would be like to have a hospital or not to have a hospital, to have all these goodies or not to have them. But we've had them, and we can imagine what it would be like to not have them. How can people who have not had progress in their lives make a choice? Do you understand my question?
I think that most people have had some exposure to those things. There aren't very many people left in the world who haven't been somehow touched by European influence. And so that you've had a relative or you've seen it on television or you somehow have had some contact, so you begin to know what those things mean. I don't think that there are people who are so isolated anymore that they wouldn't have some basis on which to.
I worked for 30 years with the Dukeborg community and watched things happening there, and I'm sure that people 30 years ago in the Dukeborg community, when they started just incrementally starting building houses with picture windows because they didn't want their kids to be second-class citizens, they had no idea of what was going to be happening over the next 30 years to their culture. And I'm saying,
I think that's the important thing, is that when people are first introduced to, in quotes, new things or modern things, you first initially focus in on the positive aspects. And I think it's wrong to say that all progress and all modern things are bad. I mean, there are some things that are very good about them. But what you first see are the positive aspects. Someone doesn't show you a car and first thing show you people that have died in car accidents. What they show you is what a car, mobility, and what freedom it gives you. And I think that's the same thing that happens. And it's only at a later date, when you've had the thing around for a long time, you begin to see what the negative aspects of it are. Just as an example, I think the television set. We lived in a town in Mozambique. There was that Swedish sawmill project. We were just on the border of Zimbabwe, so we were able to receive Zimbabwe television, and the Swedes had left this TV, or a couple of TVs and video machines in the community when they pulled out. And one of the TVs was mounted on the outside of the store, such that any Mozambican could walk up in the evening and watch television. And it was an incredibly positive step, in the sense that a couple nights a week, Zimbabwe television had shows that were in a local African language, and the shows were produced in Zimbabwe. They had shown a cultural content, which was the same tribe that lived in the area we were in Mozambique. And for these people to see their own culture on the television set and have that medium of interchange with people of the same tribe in Zimbabwe was very good. And there would be 250 people standing watching this television program, just rolling in laughter. Some of it was comedy. And it was a positive community building thing, and there was potential for education that was coming through that television set that was useful. But all other nights, there was Dallas. It was just incredible. Ski races and just stuff, that had no bearing whatsoever on reality for them. And it was awful things for them to be seeing. And, it's for them to make that decision. I mean, for them,
But see, in our culture too, television had been
Well, yeah,
touted as a major
exactly.
educational influence.
And it can be.
It can be, but hardly ever is.
but hardly ever
I mean,
is,
there's
exactly.
a-
And I think that's
there's
true with
one
all these things.
channel.
For them to judge that without having the
No.
experience is just virtually impossible. And so I think, there will be a lot of people who say, yeah, we want that. They don't know why, they don't know what its effects are, but it sounds good. And
Well, it's one form of entertainment, which they have, their level of entertainment is, unless they create it themselves.
But I think that goes through from one extreme to the other. It doesn't have to be television, which is something that's easy to shit on and say, yeah, it's awful. But there are lots of other things that appear to be initially very
It
positive.
seems like in our culture, like for us in the Kootenays, we should know better, and yet people still get sucked in by
Yeah,
the
and
same
so how can we
How can we-
tone them?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Exactly.
But we have too many points of view all the time, that's the trouble, I mean, just as soon as you see something positive, some people just have to turn it into negative, and you listen to this so much.
Yeah, but the thing is, sometimes the negative parts are important, and they
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
been noticed before.
Well, that may be true, but into the extreme, like poverty is good if it's not all the time, you see what I mean? Or positive is not always good if it's too much of it too, but we get too much of everything as far as I can see.
I want to ask one thing relating to our social structure. What do you see as a possible structural change in our forestry-related practices to bring management down to a local level?
Well, I don't know. It's a tough one to answer. I guess my feeling is, again, this is my personal opinion, but I think that number one, the management units have to be reduced in size, such that they have some reality for the communities that are in the area. And then secondly, the management decisions with regard to those management units have to be decentralized to the communities that live in the area that it's happening. I think if those two changes occurred, we would see a dramatic change in forestry in BC. There's a book that's over there on the table called Tree Talk, which is written in the States, and it talks about community forestry management and also even private husbandry. In a sense, you hire someone who manages an area and becomes responsible for it. Those are options which basically have gone by the wayside in Canada, but I think they're things that we could be thinking about. Those to me would be the start. I think, the science of forest management is progressive. We know what can be done and what should be done. It's a matter that the economic and political structures don't allow it to happen because it's not to the economic benefit of those who presently control the structures to do it that way.
You have to convince more people that is the case. You have to get the message to more people.
I think that raises a thing which hasn't come out of this discussion, but I was hoping to get into, but we don't have time, but this question of the urban versus the rural. And that's extremely important in the third world, particularly because all development monies are generally focused on the urban centers. I mean, that's where Western civilization comes in, and that's where the power resides. And that parallel with BC is almost absolute. I mean, you're seeing the power, the money, everything is concentrated in the lower mainland. And that's why we here living in the Kootenays can identify so easily with these rural people, because that situation is similar. And it's a very nasty one to deal with, and I think that's what's happening in forestry in BC. It's decisions. Someone once said that by allowing the floatplanes to go from downtown Vancouver, the center of the business center, to the downtown of Victoria, changed resource management in BC more than any other single act. Because it meant that a businessman sitting in a tower in Vancouver could be in an office of a person in the legislature in half an hour whenever he wanted to be. That may be the truth.
Is that they did in Vancouver to Victoria?
Yeah, you can go by float plane from downtown Vancouver.
I was just going to mention, do you think there are certain aspects of Scandinavian silvicultural practices and that would be a benefit to us? In Finland, for instance, most of the forest lands are privately owned, and there are two farmers there. Norway and Sweden both have different techniques for handling their forests.
Okay, go ahead. I wanted to sort of tie into what you're saying here, because from what I understand of what's going on in say, Finland and Sweden and some of the other Scandinavian countries is that they really do an intensive educational program right from the elementary school level in these alternative forestry programs. And I think that's where, you start, you've really got to push the educational system so that these programs are taught in the school, so that when these kids are coming out of school, that they can identify with a certain program and say, and influence the curriculum, or help to influence the curriculum in some way, so that these programs will be brought up.
I think you have to be careful in looking at Scandinavia as the answer to what you want in forestry in BC, though, because number one, in terms of silvicultural practices, I think they may be doing a better job. There's less waste, probably better management. But the other side of the coin is that part of the reason they've gone to that is because they've run out. Like basically, all their forests are managed. And what a lot of people value in the Kootenays are unmanaged forests. And if we went to the Scandinavian model here, we would see just exactly what people in the West Arm are trying to fight today, is that every square hectare is managed for growing trees, and that's it. That is the primary use.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that the community control and the social structures are really all that much better. They're still basically industrial forests.
Yeah.
And
Couldn't a portion of the forest be demarcated as industrial forest and the rest remain
that's a possibility.
untouched?
If the community is willing to make that decision, but right now that decision can only be made in Victoria, and the decision is made that we will provide industrial forests.
But whatever program you have, isn't it sort of paramount that program be taught at lower levels of education and then be implemented, in the educational structure?
I think the problem is that when we speak of teaching here in Canada, we speak of teaching technical matters, scientific, technical things. We don't.
Yeah, but that can change. I mean, it's not.
It's the cultural and the social and the political questions. And given the present education system in Canada, I wouldn't want to entrust them with teaching those things, because any technical things they taught would carry all those other social and political baggage with them.
Yeah.
And you were talking with people who did a good job managing forests, they thought it was fine when McCloud and Lardeau did it. And that's not what I would like to see. Maybe.
Well, I agree. I mean, it has to be a sort of integrated change. You have to change the philosophy of the society as well. So,
But that's very difficult because, every time I introduce something into the education thing that is of progressive opinion, there are always those factions that will come in and turn it down. I know that in Ontario they had a peace education program, and immediately, within 2 years, as soon as it was doing well, then they totally banned the program. And so we're teaching, all kinds of leftist concepts in the mainstream education.
that's where you need direct control with the school trustee program.
And they also are not buying any films anymore on these issues and things like that. They would rather buy a film series or more as part of their history lesson.
So that's where the changing of the educational system becomes really paramount.
But I don't think that much progress will be made along any of these lines that we talked about this morning until such time as we have decentralization established. Elect people who believe in the decentralization of resource control and development of resources and development of communities. That power should rest in the hands of the municipalities rather than the hands of the central government.
So, thank you very much. I think that, from my point of view, I think this went very well, and I think it went well because people participated and had lots of good things to say. So, thank you.
When you think of blood rising, you know that it's working.